today we're going to be dealing with electrolysis of solutions, and at GCSE level we're going to investigate 3 solutions, and the one we're going to do is electrolysis of copper 2 sulphate solution. So the formula of copper 2 sulphate is CuSO4. It's in solution, so we have AQ.
So, Miss McLaren, now, if I remember from the previous video, we have to work out which ions are present in the copper 2 sulphate and in the water, and write all the ions down here. So could you do that for us?
No problem at all, Dr. Bourne. So, copper 2 sulphate, we have copper 2 plus ion, we have the sulphate ion.
Right, SO4 2 minus, right.
We have the aqueous, so we also have the hydrogen ions and the hydroxide.
Lovely. Now in the electrolyte, these are all in solution, so they're able to move towards one of the electrodes. Now the negative electrode is called the cathode. So which ions are going to be attracted to the cathode, Miss McLaren?
Well, we know that opposite charges attract. So if it's negative, we're going to be dealing with the positive ions, Dr. Bourne. So we'll have copper 2 plus and hydrogen ions.
Lovely. Now while we are thinking about attraction, the anode is the positive electrode. So which of our ions will be attracted to the anode?
Again, very straightforward, Dr. Bourne. That will be the negative ions. And we have sulphate and hydroxide, which is OH minus.
Perfect. Now, in the last video, we had little rules for working out which of these ions would be discharged at the electrode. So which will stay in solution and which will gain or lose electrons. So what are the rules for discharge at the cathode?
It's known as preferential discharge, and for the cathode it's very straightforward. The one which will be discharged will be the ion which is the least reactive. So in this case you've got copper 2 plus, hydrogen ions. The least reactive ion here is copper 2 plus. The copper 2 plus will accept the electrons from the cathode. So we have the copper 2 plus, which will be preferentially discharged.
Okay, so at the cathode, the copper 2 plus will gain electrons. So what can we write an equation for what's happening at the cathode?
Right, we can do that. The copper 2 plus ions picks up electrons from the cathode.
How many?
Because it's 2 plus, it will pick up 2 electrons.
Okay, great.
And in doing so, it will form copper atoms.
Right, so we go from copper ions to copper atoms. Perfect. Let's have a look at the anode. The anode is the positive electrode. We know that both the sulphate and the hydroxide ions will be attracted, but which one will be discharged at the anode?
Again, these are the rules of preferential discharge. And for the anode, the rules are, it is a halide, will lose its electrons before hydroxide, before any other ion. Now in this case, we have sulphate and hydroxide. So the hydroxide will lose its electrons to the anode. And that's the one that's preferentially discharged.
Okay, so if there was a halide, it would be a halide. If there's no halide, it'll be a hydroxide.
That is correct.
Okay, now, what is the equation? A bit trickier question here. What is the equation for what happens at the anode to the hydroxide ions?
Now, this equation you have to learn. It's a little bit tricky to actually work out, so let me talk you through it. The hydroxide turns into oxygen plus water. And when you balance this equation, you have 2 waters. Now there you can see 2 oxygens. 2 oxygens there, that gives you a total of 4. You put 4 in front of the hydroxide. You can see you have an overall charge of 4 negative, which means it will transfer 4 electrons to the anode. So we have 4 electrons there, and this hydroxide has been oxidized. We did introduce this term in the last vlog. So loss of electrons is oxidation. So the hydroxide has been oxidized, And with the copper 2+ ion that has gained electrons, again, we have introduced this term, is reduction, gain of electrons.
Perfect. So we know what's attracted, we know what's discharged, we know what's happening at the electron level, but what do we actually see? What do we observe at each of the electrodes? So let's do the copper first.
Well, if you look at the product product is copper.
Mm-hmm.
And for your observation, you don't see copper, you see a pink-brown solid.
So we know it's copper, but in terms of you are describing what you actually see, and what you see is a pinky brown solid. So that's the answer you need to give. Now, with this one, I think maybe it's a bit easier because we've got oxygen here. So what would your observation be here?
Well, oxygen's a gas and it's colourless, so you would actually see a colourless gas or fizzing, effervescence,
Bubbles?
but indicate colourless. So
Okay.
bubbles of colourless gas.
Perfect. Lovely. Bubbles of colourless gas. So quite a lot of content here to be understood and learned, I would say, wouldn't you, Miss McLaren?
Totally agree with you.
Bubbles. Great.
Wow.
I think we're done.
I think bish bash bosh.
Job
Job
done.
done.